Hi, I'm Scott.
And I'm Jamie.
And welcome to God or Not, the podcast where truth springs from argument among friends. This is episode number 3. And coming up, Jamie and I will be talking about abortion. Also in this episode, Oh, the Humanity. So grab your popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the center ring. This is the God or Not podcast. We're in for a great night of civil discourse here as these two warriors are rounded up and ready to go. And now, let's get ready to dialogue!
Okay, so we're all set here for episode number 3. As we're recording this, we're recording this intro right now on October 2nd. So this is the day after we officially, quote unquote, released the podcast. And I don't know, it's been kind of fun to finally get the thing out there. We've spent so much time working on it. You know, it's nice to see some fruits from our labor. I don't know. What are your thoughts on our release, on the unveiling?
Right. Well, I am particularly excited because there's a lot of people who did not believe I had a podcast because they've been waiting so long to hear it. And so, I'm like, hey, listen, look, it is real. I am a co-host of a podcast, and here it is. So it's been neat to kind of like hand people, so to speak, like this all pretty done up package, like finished.
So suck on that,
this finished package. It's been cool that people hear, like my wife. She of course has been hearing almost everything one-sided the whole time, but she has listened, you know, through the episodes now, and she was like, "Whew." She goes,
it's amazing that even though she was only hearing your side of the argument, she still thought you were losing all of the arguments.
Right. No, she said,
that's kind of weird how that turned out.
She said, she goes, you only embarrassed yourself a couple of times. That's good. No, but I think people are pretty happy with how it's turned out. And I know that we are.
Yeah, I think so.
And I know that it's just going to get better, but it's been exciting to see people's reaction. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been getting some mostly positive, well, all positive reactions, actually. I haven't really heard anything negative. But one thing I wanted to point out here is that so these first few weeks, we're going to be releasing episodes every week. But at some point, probably a month into it or so, we're going to be going bi-weekly, right? We're going to be releasing new episodes every other week. And then the reason we wanted to do that is, well, you know, we didn't want this to dominate our lives. We have a lot of fun doing it. We want to do a good job, but, you know, we still, you know, one thing that I really appreciate, and I think we're definitely on the same page from the get-go, is that family has priority, right? And so, you know, we've had several times when we had scheduled to record and things like that, and we had family issues come up, and I really appreciate, I know it's, you know, we both kind of are thinking the same thing, but I just wanted to tell you that I appreciate the flexibility that you've been, you know, showing in that kind of thing, in you know, when family things come up. It's just, you know, it's just a given, you know, it's okay. We'll record a different day, and that's fine.
That's part of the genius of, I think, of how we set it up, is that, so the idea was if we recorded every other week, and if we had a few podcasts kind of in the bank, so to speak, ready to go, that we wouldn't ever feel like, you know, some big things have come up, and we still have to record tonight because we have to have this done by this date to have this out by that date. And that would just take all the fun out of it. And so I think you and I both were.
And then I think the quality would suffer as a result. Yeah. I think the quality would suffer if we feel rushed, or if we feel like it's drudgery.
And we want to be consistent. That's one of the things that I found I like about podcasts are, there are certain podcasts that I subscribe to that they're very consistent. I know such and such will be out on Monday night, and I look forward to those. And so we also wanted to be consistent. We wanted to make sure that there's a podcast out, you know, every other week without fail. And in that way, you know, people don't think we've fallen off the edge of the map, and now we're done. We're going to be consistent with this. So I think we've laid out a pretty good plan. It's only taken us a year.
Right. Oh boy. Yeah. It's been a long road to get here, but anyway, okay. So we're happy. We're happy things have rolled out well. We got the websites up and running. This third episode, we're going to, well, I suppose in a way it's a religious topic, but not entirely. I mean, there's definitely, other than, there's influences other than religion as far as people's opinion on abortion. I mean, that's the subject we're talking about today. And the listening to some of the atheist shows that I listen to and some of the atheist groups, there are pro-life
secular pro-life
atheists out there. Yep. Exactly. And so that's so there's plenty. Well, there's plenty of room for argument here. I don't know. What are your thoughts on there? I know that Ohio has been involved in some of the stuff recently. So let's, how's this going to relate to
the last year or
here?
So? The abortion topic has kind of been thrown into the news. So, I mean, we've seen this since Roe v. Wade. Every X amount of years, we'll have kind of the abortion topic uprising again, where it's in politics and it's in public discourse, and then it'll die off for a little bit, and it's kind of, I don't know if it's the bear in slumber or a volcano that's dormant, and then something happens, and that's what we've seen this last year. Is we've had a number of pro-life governors. I guess I don't want to say pro-life judges, but regardless, there have been a number of pro-life pushes and some pro-choice pushback in other states. In Ohio, where I'm from, has been on kind of in the front as far as that goes, putting out some legislation on abortion, limiting abortion, and we see certain states limiting abortion completely, and other states limiting abortion at certain times, and then we see other states even opening up abortion even more. Some of the more pro-choice states opening up even more. So it's been a real activity. I almost like it to a volcano. It sat dormant for a while, and now we're having some earthquakes and some fissures open up, and some, we have some magma flow. And so that's what's been going on the last year is abortion has, and everybody has an opinion on abortion. Everybody. So
right. So there's a plenty of room for argument there to be had. This
topic is going to hit home for everybody. Everyone has, and it's not like it's a real easygoing opinion either. Like, there are strong opinions. If you're pro-life, you're pro-life. You're pro-choice, you're pro. There's not a lot of people that are like, there's not a whole lot of that going on.
Well, I mean, if there are, they're not the ones who are grabbing the headlines, right? I mean, if if there is that center group, then, they just don't really say much because it's not really a strong issue for them. So we're definitely, this is definitely a current, as if it couldn't be a current event. But one thing that I wanted to bring, and we do talk about this a little bit in the discussion itself, but I think it's worth, it bears repeating here. And that is that we at least have to acknowledge that we're a couple of men talking about what is basically a woman's issue. And now I know it does affect everyone. It does affect everyone, but I think that as two people who can't, or would be extremely difficult for us to get pregnant, it's not an issue that affects us directly. Obviously, it affects people that we care about, and that doesn't mean that we can't have an opinion. But I do think that that's something that needs to be acknowledged. Is that we're just a couple of guys talking about something here, and so we don't have that female perspective. And, we can still have a discussion. Obviously, we can still talk about what's important to us. We can still talk about the ramifications on the legal end of the deal.
Right. I mean, but
at the end of the day,
there were a lot of people in the 1800s or 1700s, 1800s that didn't own slaves, that still had an opinion on it. And
Right.
so, yeah.
Right, of
So,
course.
I think that was, that was a good representation. Yeah, we're not female, and that does carry maybe a different perspective, and we'll try to be cognizant of that. But it's also
Right.
okay to, just because we're men doesn't mean that we can't have or shouldn't have an opinion either way on this topic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we both have female family members, and so, but I think it would, I think that we would welcome opinion from women out there. If you want to email us and tell us, no, you're just a couple of guys, you don't know what you're talking about, that's fine. If you want to, if you want to inform us, I mean, we're always open to hearing other opinions, and so I
if
think
someone
that,
was going to email us, Scott, how would they go about doing that?
How would they do that? Well, we happen to have a thing on the interwebs all set up to get that kind of stuff, and they'd email us to email@godornotpodcast.com.
Very good.
Or they could go to the website, and the email address is there. The website is, of course, www.godornotpodcast.com.
We take hate, we take love, and everything in between. So send us your email,
and we take it all with a grain of salt.
We might read it on the air.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so then, having said all of that, let's wade into this discussion on abortion.
This is the main event.
All right, everybody, here we go. Put the gloves on. We are jumping into the weeds. Today on the God or Not podcast, we're talking about abortion. Just some light talk,
Right, just light, light banter.
Tea time talk, really.
Exactly, right. Pinkies out and everything.
So this is one of those already. This is one of those subjects that are what we call evergreen, meaning they are evergreen. They are something that, as long as there are abortions, this will be a topic for discussion. And so, while this is an evergreen subject, it's actually recently been in the news. We've had a couple of places in the United States here that have pushed forward some bills, both in the pro-choice camp and the pro-life camp. And so we're seeing this movement to put abortion back kind of in the wheelhouse or on the front page, so to speak. And so this podcast comes very timely. So I thought maybe we could...
straight from the headlines.
I knew you were going to say that. I feel like there should be like a Law and Order gong gong.
Dun dun. I should get that sound effect.
So
I would probably get busted for it.
Yeah, probably copyright violation. So we lose the podcast, right. And I'm homeless. But so Scott, why don't we start with your position? Why don't you go ahead and just give us a cliff note of where you stand on abortion and why? Sure.
Okay. Well, I'm pro-choice. And what I think it boils down to is there's really two issues that this addresses. First of all, and the first part would be what is it that makes a person? What's the difference between a lump of cells and a human being, a person, a person with rights, an individual. And so that would be the first part. The second part, which we'll talk about a little later on, has to do with what rights does a woman have to her body, and to have things done to and with her body and those kind of things. And so there's really two issues for me. I would say the bulk of my argument rests mostly on the bodily autonomy side of it. And but I think that the personhood issue, I think, is not irrelevant. And so, so if we can start with that.
Sure. I think
first of all.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that what ends up happening is we start with the bodily autonomy and end up talking primarily about personhood, and somehow that gets drug in, always gets drug into the conversation. So, why don't you go ahead and talk to me a little bit about when you think someone is a person?
Sure. Okay, so just kind of recap. Well, first of all, before we say anything, I just want to comment on the fact that we're just a couple of guys talking about abortion, and so we're missing some very key perspectives here. Now, that's not to say that we can't talk about it and that we can't have a meaningful discussion about it, but I think it's worth at least mentioning that we're missing the female perspective on this, and so take it for what it's worth. And so, but I would say that the idea of a person is all going to be centered around an individual. That's what makes us a person, is the fact that we're an individual unit separate from other people around us. And so if we think about how the process goes, about how a baby comes to be, we have the ova starting in the woman's ovaries, and the woman is born with them. And then at some stage in the woman's life, then the circumstances are right, and
I'm blushing, Scott. I'm blushing.
What's that?
I'm blushing right now.
Am I too graphic already? We're talking about like bits and parts and stuff,
right? Go ahead.
So at some point in the woman's life, that the conditions will be right, and one of the eggs will leave and enter into the fallopian tubes. And that's an important step, and it has to happen. And so then the egg will go down, and then in some case, and then under certain circumstances, the egg will be fertilized. And again, that's an important step. You can't continue to the next step unless each of these steps is completed to begin with. So in some of those cases, the egg will be fertilized. And then in some of those cases, the egg will continue down and implant in the uterus. Not all the time, but sometimes that'll happen under the right circumstances, of course. And then, so then the egg is implanted, and then under certain circumstances, again, the correct environment and the correct stimuli, the egg will start separating and dividing and multiplying. And so then it'll grow into an embryo, and then eventually into a fetus. And then there's many stages of development in there. There's, different types of organs begin to grow, arms and legs begin to grow, and that kind of thing. But as the fetus is developing, then at some stage, the fetus becomes viable. And we can define that a few different ways. But basically what I'm talking about is it becomes capable of, because prior to viability, the fetus is reliant on other systems within the mother, is reliant on it can't provide all of the everything that it needs on its own. So there has to be interaction there. There has to be it's using the system within the mother's body. It's using the other systems already there.
So you would say that viability then is where you would endow someone with those rights that we consider a person to have.
Exactly. I would say that when the fetus becomes viable, then it becomes when it would normally become viable. Okay, there can always be hiccups or speed bumps in the road, or abnormalities or difficulties with development, and that there could be those kind of things popping up. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the normal process. So then at some point the fetus is no longer reliant on outside assistance to perform its normal life processes. Okay, it can digestion and all that kind of respiration and all those kinds of things.
Okay,
and I would say so at that point it becomes an individual from the mother. At that point it becomes a separate being, and at that point when it becomes the individual, that would be the stage where we would grant it with individual rights.
Okay, so you're saying basically the point of viability. And now something interesting, I might want to get your take on it. Tell me what you think is not off the topic, but it's a little parlay here. Is I've been thinking that I could see an end to abortion, and here's where I could see an end to it. With ironically, with science and artificial womb technology, what would you think about if we got to the point where a simple procedure could take the other human in the womb? I won't call it a human being yet because I haven't made my case. Let's say the other human in the womb. Simple procedure could take that human and put that then in an artificial womb of some kind. Would you be for or against kind of outlawing like your standard type of abortion and just say, well, listen, you're going to have to get rid of it one way or the other if you choose to do so. Why kill it if you don't have to, kind of thing? Is that something you've ever given thought to, or what would you have to say about that?
I suppose. I mean, that would certainly affect the survivability of the fetus. It would affect, whether or not the fetus can. It would artificially provide the environment that the mother's body provides,
right?
Currently, and I that'd be tough to say. I'd have to think about that. For certainly, that would be a boon. That would be a good thing from the bodily autonomy perspective. That may or may not be an issue with personhood. I mean, it's basically what we're doing is we're taking the mother's systems out of the picture and replacing them with artificial systems.
Right.
And so whether you could do the same thing like with, one of your organs or something. You could take an organ out and hook it up to a machine and keep it alive for a while.
Right.
And so, that doesn't make it a person. So we still have to discuss whether or not it's a person, whether or not it has individual rights and that kind of thing.
But that'd
be an interesting case.
Not
it would certainly.
I'm not. This is not like I got you moment. I had
sure.
I had no end to this. I just wanted to see what your thoughts were as far as if we could eliminate this whole idea of the baby or the human being, kind of that unwanted. I hate to call it a parasite, but that unwanted host there. If we had a way of being able to allow it to live, it seems to me that might be the way, the best way of pleasing both sides.
I would say, like I said, that would certainly satisfy the bodily autonomy, the mother's right to her own body. I think the personhood issue would still be an issue because then that would boil down to how do we need to treat this thing now? Is this a person or is this a lab specimen or a sample or like a seedling, like you're nursing a seedling in a nursery kind of thing. That would be a separate issue. That would not be an abortion issue. I suppose it would be, from the perspective of the fetus. And so, that would be a separate issue, but it would certainly satisfy my concerns as far as bodily autonomy.
Okay, very good. Go on.
And so, so I was going to say that, the viability, that would be the point where I would say that we infer the fetus with individual rights. So I would just make one more comment about, a lot of people would say that conception is I know this is your position too. And a little sneak peek here for what you're about to talk about. But, what happens at conception is the genome for that particular fetus is created, or the embryo, I suppose, at that stage, or even not even to that stage yet. But a genome is created at that point, and that's certainly an important step in the process. But we don't use an individual genome we don't equate that with individuality. We know that identical twins at least have to start with the same genome because there's only one conception event for one thing.
Right.
Identical twins start out as one single egg, and so at the point where they split, they have identical DNA, and so if we use DNA as the marker for an individual, then how do we consider twins?
Right.
And also in it, like an adult human being, not all of your DNA is the same.
Right.
You know, there's certain variations in your body, replication errors, mutations, all that kind of stuff goes on. And so having a unique DNA does not give you individuality, and likewise, being an individual does not guarantee that you'll have a unique DNA. And so that would be my preemptive argument against that. But
I see what you did there. I kind of like it. Well, I would say that if you was that pretty good summary of your position then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that kind of wraps it up.
So, of course, my stance on the whole abortion issue is I believe that life begins at conception. And I know we've had discussion about this before. So some of the things that I've been thinking about as it relates to conception and the reason why we pick conception is when we do talk about the DNA of the human in the womb, the reason why we say that DNA is individual to that human, and the reason why I think that it could be used, at least in part, as a reason why to choose conception is because it's different DNA. It's not the mother's DNA. It's not the father's DNA. So it is human, and it is a different DNA. So we're talking about a third party now. We're not just dealing with the mother or the father, but there's a third party in there, regardless of whether or not you want to endow it with rights yet or anything like that. And so that would be one of the reasons why I think conception is that good starting point. But the other reason, actually, my wife thought of, and I don't know why I didn't think of this before. Of course, I was talking to her about some of our discussions, some of the stuff we do online, and she said, well, conception is really the first time when you could have an abortion. It's the first time when you're pregnant. And so I think that that's another reason why we would say that makes for a good starting point. It is the first time when anybody really even cares, right? Before that, your pro-lifers aren't really saying much. It's after that egg
implantation would be because right. So it's not a pregnancy until the fertilized egg implants.
Okay. So, but what I'm saying is a conception, that would be the first time where if it was intentionally killed or intentionally destroyed, I believe that would be destroying of a separate human individual. And so I think that with those two reasons, I think that makes conception a good starting place.
Well, you said you just kind of called it a third party. You didn't really say, why.
Well, I'm not giving it personhood yet. I'm not giving it any rights yet. I'm saying that that it is human, as human DNA. And I think that we could distinguish between, let's say, like a clump of cells. So like I could flick off some this sounds disgusting, but I could flick off some cells off the top of my hand and they could plummet to their death. And that's a part of me, but that is not me. And so I think we have to distinguish between the parts and the whole. So with that thing that is in the womb, whatever you want to call it, it is that thing. It is not part of that thing. It's not like a clump.
It would be part of the mother.
Well,
it would be part of the mother.
No,
right? It's the mother's egg.
Well, when it's fertilized, but see, I think, but I think that that's part of the argument is that when the egg is fertilized with the sperm, that at that point now we're dealing with separate DNA. Whether or not you want to say it's that allows it some kind of individual genome equating to individual person. I'm not making that claim right now that it becomes somehow that they are endowed at that point with personhood. I'm just saying
it's different than the DNA than the rest of the DNA in the mother.
And it's different in that it isn't part of the mother in terms of like skin cells or skin DNA or whatever, that it is isn't the part, it's the whole.
Right. Well, that's where your opinion is coming in. Is that you're saying that it's not part of the whole?
So
So my question would be, why are you saying that why are you saying that would be the spot where you'd say that it's not part of the whole?
That it's not part of the mother?
Correct.
Well, because I think at that point you could say that it's inside the mother, but the only thing that is connecting that mother with that egg is that environment, but that is not her DNA. And like I mentioned before, also too, that is the first point in which an abortion could even happen. And so that's why we say, well, let's start at conception, because if there's this question between these camps of when does life begin, or you know what, I don't even know if it's, and maybe you could speak on this. I don't even know if it's controversial to say that life begins at conception. I think what's controversial would be to say that we're going to now endow this whatever it is, this zygote or whatever, with personhood or individual rights. Would you agree with that or not?
I don't know. It depends what you mean by life. It depends.
I would say
because the egg cell was certainly alive before it was fertilized.
Right, but I would,
and so it was living prior to that.
Right. No, I get that, but I would say that the life would be like it metabolizes food for energy, it responds to stimuli, and like it grows through cellular production. So like you're getting those kind of things. And again,
so it's on the spectrum. It's on the spectrum,
right?
It's on
of life, and that it's
of development,
and it's not. I think it would be safe to say it's not the mother's life, because it has different, distinct DNA.
Well, again, that's you're imposing that's your opinion. You're saying it's not the mother's life. So my question is why?
Because
go
ahead. I'm sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
I'm saying you're saying that the DNA is different and it's not the mother's life. And what I'm saying is, what's the connection there? Why are you saying it's not the mother's life just because the DNA of this egg has been changed?
Well, I mean, it seems to me that that's a pretty big distinction there, that it's a third set of genetic material, and that it is not like skin DNA or vomit DNA in that it is the whole and not the part.
Sure, it's new DNA, different than the rest of the DNA in the mother.
Right, and it's not like skin DNA or vomit DNA in that those are parts of the mother, whereas that fertilized egg now is distinct in that it is a whole itself.
Right, that's what you're saying. That's your claim.
Right.
And what I'm asking is, can you justify that thing you just said?
Yeah, I think I did by saying that.
You described it, but you didn't say why. Why is the fact that cell has DNA that's different than the rest of the body? Mm-hmm. Why does that fact make that different? Why does that make that not the mother? Because that could happen in other parts. If you could have a cell that there's a reproduction error or something like that, and there's cells in your body that have DNA that's different than the rest of your body. If you have like a donor heart or something, the DNA in the heart is different than the rest of your body.
Right.
But that doesn't make it an individual.
Right.
So what I'm asking is, what makes this an individual?
That's a good question. And I would say then we lean on philosophy at that point and say that it has potentiality. So when we ask ourselves, well, what is this thing in the process of doing? And it's in the process of growing as a human. And so it'd be different than some kind of rogue, cell with some kind of crazy DNA, in that it has this potentiality about it that is human.
Right. But again, that potentiality would exist all the way throughout the spectrum.
Right.
Unfertilized egg has potentiality and so on.
That's true. But what I would say, though, is the reason why we say, well, let's start at conception, is because that's the first moment when an abortion could really take place. That is the first moment when there's a third set of DNA. You're not just dealing with the mother or father, but now you're dealing with this third entity that has potentiality. That's why I would say.
But again, that's just descriptive. That's just a descriptive
of
what's happening.
You described too viability.
What I'm asking is, right, but I'm saying viability, then we have a separate individual, an individual body that is capable of sustaining its own systems on its own. And so
Right.
we'd grant individual rights when we have an individual.
And I say that you would grant,
That's what I would say.
grant individual rights because this is distinct from the mother and it is potentiality as a human being, right? Are those not good reasons? Like you keep asking me for reasons and I'm trying to give you those reasons.
But you're saying it's distinct from the mother. Well, you're assuming it's distinct from the mother. What we know, what we would agree on is that it's distinct from the rest of the mother's cells. And now does that make and so the question is, does the fact that it's distinct from the rest of the mother's cells make it distinct from the mother? Does the fact that the DNA in that cell is different than the rest of the DNA around it, does that make it not the mother? Because we can have other situations. Right. We can have other situations where there's an individual cell in the mother that has distinct DNA. I'm sure within your body, there's probably billions of cells that have unique DNA different than the rest of your body. But we don't say that's an individual.
Right, but the thing that makes it the individual is the potentiality. This is human, in that it is in the process of, it's metabolizing energy or food for energy, and it's responding to stimuli, it's growing through cellular reproduction, and it's doing these things that it is in the early stages of development of a human being. And so that's why I would say that it's not the mother's and that it's not the father's, that it's a different set of DNA and that it is distinct and that it is human and that it has potentiality to, through the course of its growth and development, of being that fully developed human being. That's why I would say.
Okay.
So
all right. Well, I think we're kind of going around in circles here. So let's shut this off. I did want to ask you one question before we go on to the bodily autonomy, and what do you say about? So it turns out about 50%. You're going to get different margins of error, basically, depending on what research you look into. But about half of the fertilized eggs do not implant and are flushed out of the mother's system with their normal cycle. What do you think is happening there? Do you think that that there's a negligent homicide happening here, or what's?
For some reason I hear the Law and Order thing again. No, I think that what happens there is
just people dying.
Well, I would say that's a natural abortion, and I would say it's very nuanced, but. One thing we could say about it is I don't think that because these things happen naturally, that then follows, then we have the right to intentionally do that. So I'm saying one doesn't follow from the other.
Right. I'm asking this as a separate question. So how does that, if you know that 50% of the potential human beings are dying,
right?
Needlessly. What do you?
Right.
I mean, it seems like we don't. It seems like we make no effort to do anything at all.
Well, what could we? I mean, I think that we have done things. For instance, women do all kinds of prenatal things. They do all kinds of things in advance of pregnancy to try to get pregnant and sustain the pregnancy. So, I mean, I think that if there was a way that women were able to do things, pre-fertilization, pre-implant, to make that more successful, I think they would. I mean, I know that there's some in my family who have done that, and so I think that it. Yeah, I mean, does it stink that we're losing these quote people through these natural abortions, so to speak? Yeah, it does. And if there's a way to prevent
But
that.
you just consider that part of the circle, part of the natural circle of life.
I would say
kind of
that
thing.
I would say that if
It's
there was
unfortunate,
a way,
but it happens.
and if there was something we could do to prevent it, I would be in favor of trying to do that. But I think most people do try to do that through preventative things. Hey, we're going to try to have a baby or something like that, and they're I think that you pretty much summed it up. I think it's tragic, but I think obviously it doesn't then follow that we can intentionally do something like that. But I know you were talking.
I wasn't suggesting it was. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And so one totally separate question here. Do you think then that we have an obligation to commemorate these lost souls here, or do you?
No.
Should we be having funerals every month?
Wow. Yeah. No.
That kind of thing.
No. I think that that's probably a good question, but I think what we see here is that our attachment to things doesn't necessarily give value in terms of life. So, I don't want to open up a whole other can of worms, but there was this.
Yeah, you do. Admit it. It's okay.
There was this.
We're all friends here. You can admit that.
You've heard of the experiment with the thought experiment about the burning in vitro lab, and there's a 2-year-old in the corner, and there's 1,000 of these embryos, and you have to make a decision to save one or the other, and everybody saves the 2-year-old, and they're like, see, it shows that you don't think those are people either, and that's
so here you are a former fireman. You have you're in a position to give a unique perspective on this particular.
So that's a good point. So as well as a fireman, not morally speaking, but as a fireman, a lot of it has to do with who do we think have the best chances at survival. But as a father, just because I would grab my 2-year-old and not the 1,000 embryos on the petri dish. Doesn't mean that those embryos are less valuable. However, I have a special attachment to my own child. And if I had the opportunity to save my child or 2 of someone else's children, that would give me a moment of pause. Do I save my child or do I save 2 other children? I mean, that's a tough decision, but just because I decide to save my child doesn't make those other 2 less valuable. So
no. That's an emotional issue.
So I'm bringing it back around to this whole thing where you have all these spontaneous abortions, and so while it's sad and if we can prevent it, great, but I don't think we commemorate that kind of thing because we don't have any kind of special attachment. I don't think it makes it these beings any less valuable. I just think that obviously, we give, special things to things we have special attachments to. And so that's why you're not seeing all kinds of, plus a lot of women don't even know these things happen. Sometimes these happen, they don't even know it. So,
most of the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I have one last question, just you can be a yes or no quickie and then we'll move on.
Okay.
So when people do in vitro fertilization, they fertilize eggs with the intention of throwing most of them away.
Right.
Do you think these people are murderers?
Boy, no, but I haven't given this much thought, to be honest with you. So,
okay. All right. I didn't want to make it, another rabbit hole here. So we can move on. I asked for a yes or no answer and you gave it. So we don't need to, dwell on it.
All right, very good. So, let's if you're kind of finished with me, so to speak, in that
I'm done with this one. Bring in the next one. Right. Bring in the next one.
How about we move on to this idea of bodily autonomy? How does that sound? All right. So why don't you? Because I think I would completely agree with you as far as the idea of bodily autonomy, as far as the definition of. So why don't you go ahead and give our listeners kind of a definition of this?
Right. Well, the idea is that if you possess anything, you possess your body. You own your body. If there's anything in the universe that is yours, it has to start with your body. That has to be, your most fundamental possession, your most fundamental ownership, your most fundamental. I don't know if you'd use the word sovereign in those respects, but you're
right.
your domain, right? That's it. And so, and if we think about it in terms of, I like to compare it to slavery. Okay. Now, what's the difference between me doing a favor for my neighbor and me being my neighbor's slave? Well, the difference is my consent. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if he says, hey, can you get my mail for me while I'm out of town next week? Yeah, sure. No problem. I'm consenting to that. And so the difference is if he said, you're going to get my mail or I'm going to whip you, then that's crossing the line because it's against my consent. Or we could compare it to rape. Consensual sex is a good thing, right? That's a good thing. And so rape without somebody's consent, that's the dividing line between, if they give consent or they don't consent, setting aside issues of like statutory rape and stuff like that. Minors can't give consent and so on. But, so giving consent separates it from a good thing and a bad thing. Theft. If I give you a pencil, then it's all cool. But if you steal a pencil, then you're stealing it. So that's the line there. Or assault. For the longest time, I wondered how the heck do like hockey players get away with beating the crap out of each other on the ice. And so I actually asked a lawyer. I asked a lawyer friend of mine. I said, why don't hockey players get fined? Get arrested of they're assaulting each other. But it all boils down to consent. Right. If you consent to get the crap beat out of you, then it's okay. And so that whole idea of consent. And so this bodily autonomy issue is based around, okay, is the mother consenting to this? And so that would be kind of what the core issue of the bodily autonomy.
Sure. Okay. Very good. So let me throw a couple things at you and see what you think. So,
sure.
Kind of the idea is that what is in or on her, and then that kind of gives her the right to do with it or whatever, what she wants. So, okay. I guess my question to you would be, I'm sure it's a yes or no question, but I'm sure you're going to elaborate on this. So say somebody, or in the future, we're able to find out, we found out that homosexuality is genetically, somehow genetically linked. And so, we're having children and we find out through, some genetic testing ahead of time that they are homosexual and we want to have an abortion. Do you think that that's something that is still okay? It being like a sex or, like a, not sex selection, but we could even do that too. Hey, I wanted maybe a little less controversial. Hey, I wanted a boy and not a girl. Since it's a girl, I'm going to have an abortion. Do you think that those are any different than any other abortions?
Well, I think again that would boil down to the two main issues. First, the bodily autonomy issue. I'll say that I think that the woman has a right to not have that in her body, regardless. Okay. So if it's not a person, then that's not an issue. Then she can have it removed if it's not a person. Right. If it is a person, then it boils down to who has more of a right to the woman's body, she herself or this other person. And so in both cases, I would say the woman has a right to have this, whatever it is, either a person or not a person, have that not in her body. Now, that's part of it. The other part would be, and this is where I think the personhood issue is still relevant. And so whether or not it's a person, that would affect how we would get it out of the mother and what we would do with it. If it's if it's not a person, then it doesn't matter what we do with it. We can throw it away. We can, do experiments on it, or we can use the stem cells for help cancer patients or, for whatever. But if it's a person, then once we removed it from the mother, we have an obligation to, at least minimal amount of care and medical assistance. Just like if you would find you're walking down the street and you see somebody got hit by a car and they're laying on the side of the road, you have a certain amount of obligation to assist in that kind of thing. So that would be the two issues there.
Right. When it has to do with that, with these kind of abortion things so for instance, we have the FDA who basically they force certain women to take even they force all women to take 2 pregnancy tests before they're allowed to go on certain medications. And that's because, like, I think there's a medication called Accutane, but it's known, I think it's for acne, but it's known to cause birth defects. And so you see the FDA, they're like, well, you can't be pregnant and take this medication. So do you think that they're just not being consistent with the law? So let's say, for the sake of argument, that abortion is completely legal where this woman lives. She decides she's pregnant, but she wants to take this medication anyhow. The FDA won't allow that. So is it that the FDA is just being inconsistent with the law, or do you think that possibly they are putting some kind of intrinsic value upon that human being in the womb as well? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say, first of all, I would agree with that. If it's known to cause birth defects, then there would be. So we have to weigh the the benefit, and that would be a risk. And so, but taking the medication isn't going to affect another person now, but it will affect somebody down the line. Okay. And so, here we're not talking about a woman keeping something inside of her body, yes or no. We're talking about something that, and again, we would weigh it against, like, if it was something for acne or something like that was more of a cosmetic thing. Usually, not always. Acne can be serious and can be a severe issue. But if it were not to that level, not to that seriousness, then we would think, okay, so that's not necessarily going to be something that, that could have impact on somebody else down the line. For example,
on who?
Well, on somebody that has yet to be.
So
okay, so that's why I said it's not affecting anyone now.
So you're okay. Right. You're okay with intentionally killing or getting rid of. I won't say killing because we haven't agreed yet that it's a person. So, but let's just say you're okay with intentionally getting rid of this thing and ending its whatever kind of life it is, but you're not okay with kind of maiming it or possibly having some kind of other complications. I mean, does this all have to? So that doesn't seem inconsistent to you. That
not at all. Not at all. And I'll tell you the difference.
Yeah.
The difference is that if I kill a cell before it becomes a person, no people are affected there. There is no person that is affected. Okay, it doesn't become. But you're talking about become a person.
But you're talking about potentiality. So
I'm not talking about potentiality. I'm talking about at some point down the line, a person will be affected.
Right, and by taking that, by having an abortion, some point down the line, that person will be affected too. It won't be there.
It won't. There won't be a person to be. There won't be a person to be affected.
No, but what I'm saying though is you're saying that we don't want to use this medication because when the person is viable or whatever, they might have some issues. You're saying down the road,
will be a person. There will be a person with those issues.
Right.
Okay. So when it becomes a person, it'll have those birth defects or whatever.
So basically, what you're saying is that because you're ending this life of the zygote or whatever, it won't be, so there's no harm done. But because this other person or this other thing that will become a person then will have problems, that's the issue.
Right.
Okay. It's hard for me to see the difference.
If you terminate.
One is going to be potentially maimed, and one is going to be, in the future is going to be maimed, and one in the future is going to be dead.
No, there is nothing that's going to be dead in the future. There's no being that's going to be dead, no person that's going to be dead. It never becomes a person.
But at the time, what I'm saying though is at the time that maybe they're taking this medication, who's to say that thing isn't a person yet. So what difference does it make if you want to throw it away, or if you want to abort it, or if you want it to have all these kind of defects?
Right.
Like, what difference does it make at that point?
Well, the difference is that at some point down the line, there will be a person who will be damaged.
Okay.
If you abort,
because I just think that you're talking the same thing. It's just semantics. You're talking about.
But a terminated pregnancy will not ever be a person.
All right.
Right?
No. Well, if you terminate it, not according to me. I can't say it because I think you are killing a person, but that's we haven't established
setting that distinction aside, though. Right. If we agree that at some point in the stage before it's a person, if it's terminated before that point, then it won't ever be a person. We're not talking about a situation where there's going to be a person that's damaged. That's cut off.
It's going to be a person that's dead. I know. I know that. Yeah. I know you don't think that. I get that. I do. I just think that in one, we're killing one as an abortion because that person has potentiality. He will, if left to continue with the processes, that he will be a human being, and so we're taking that life regardless of if it's before they have being or status. Like you can claim bodily autonomy.
You can't take a life if there's no life to be taken.
Well,
you can damage a life, though. You can damage a life because that doesn't stop the life from becoming.
Yeah, but we're talking about potentiality, right?
I'm not talking about potentiality. I'm talking about actual people that are damaged.
Right.
If there's birth defects, there's an actual person that's damaged.
Right.
If you abort the pregnancy before it becomes a person, there is no person that is damaged.
Okay, we'll have to agree to disagree on that one.
Okay.
So, I mean, I know you think it seems so clear and simple to you, right? We've talked about this before. Like, I realize that you think, how can he not get this? One is going to be this person outside the womb, crippled, and the other one just won't ever exist. I get your position. What I'm saying, though, is I think that the one that was aborted, has potentiality, and that by taking it, we are snuffing out its potentiality. So that it does have rights, in that there's those potential rights as a human. But we just have to agree to disagree, because I mean, I think I understand your position. I think you understand mine. We just disagree on that. But anyhow, let me ask you a couple of questions. As far as I'd like to get your take on something, a particular analogy. This isn't the violinist analogy. This is another one, the shorter one. So we're talking about bodily autonomy, absolute bodily autonomy. And so I see that we don't have that in regards to other things in life, right? I mean, would you agree that I don't have, I can't do anything I want to, obviously, that hurts someone else. And I can't even do certain things that would just hurt me. I can't take certain drugs and things like that. So my question is this, do you think it's consistent to say, from your position, consistent to say, we could tell you what you can and cannot do with your body, except for in this particular circumstances? And then if not, what's the distinction?
Well, what do you mean the except in the circumstances? I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, so like abortion. So we could tell you that you can't take certain drugs. We could tell you that you can't take this Accutane drug that's going to make this person or this potential baby deformed. Mm-hmm. We tell you that you can't hit other people. We tell you that you do all these other things. Right. So we don't have absolute bodily autonomy, but there are certain things we tell you can't do with your body, or that's in your body. So how, I'm just asking what the distinction is. What's the difference between those instances and say abortion?
Mm-hmm. I would say that, I would disagree with many of the limitations or many of the laws that we have that say you can't do certain things.
So maybe some of those are just being inconsistent with
Well, there's
like
the
some of those
law,
things you're
and
talking
then
about,
there's
right?
right. Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
the
right.
law is the law, and so whether or not I agree with the laws is a separate issue. There's going to be some laws that I disagree with, and I would say that I is there might be circumstances where we would consider somebody to be uninformed about the repercussions of doing something, and we might caution them or warn them or ask them to make sure that they understand what's going to happen if they do that. Like let's say drugs, for example. Okay, I think recreational drugs should be legal, and for the exact same reason that I've argued here. We should have a right to do what we want with our body, as long as we're not harming other people or have a good chance of harming somebody else. Okay. Right. And so I don't think there's an inconsistency there. If we're saying you can't take heroin, there could be, we could argue that you're not in your right mind if you are an addict, if you're addicted to heroin. You're not necessarily making that choice. You're having your will is being usurped at that point by the addiction, and so that could be part of that. That could be part of that argument. And so I think there's differences there. I think for the large part, I would say that you should be able to do what you want with your own body,
right?
As long as you're not infringing on somebody else's rights.
Okay, so as it is to this bodily autonomy business, so some people have looked at it or given some kind of analogy as almost like it's an unwanted, like intruder almost, so to speak, as far as the baby goes. So like I'm thinking of times where it's just, say you and I have a boat and it's Scott and Jamie, I don't know, fishing tours. It's a big boat, charter boat or something, and a ship. And we're in the middle of the sea and we find a stowaway, right? We can't just pitch him overboard. We have some kind of moral obligation, even though that is our boat. I own that boat. That is my boat. I could do basically whatever I want on this boat. But of course I can't pitch him overboard. Or say we're down in, okay, let's say we have a house in Kansas and mine's a slab. You got a basement. I come running over because the twister's here. Sounds like a freight train. And I'm like, Scott, open up, Scott, open up. So you let me down in your cellar. And then at some point we get into a discussion, because we would, and we get into an argument because we would. And you're like, you know what, Goodlet, you're out of here. Like, and like there's tornado, there's a tornado. I think you'd be held morally culpable for kicking me out in the middle of a tornado, or or we would be held culpable for throwing somebody out off their boat. And so even though that person was unwanted, we just weren't able to do whatever we wanted with them. And so I think that has something to do with and I know analogies can't be perfect, right? And I can't come up with another analogy that is like, that has another human inside another human. That would be the case itself. And so I know analogies aren't perfect, but like, what do you think about those instances where you have those?
Well, let's take the boat example. Okay, let's take the boat. So we're out on our fishing boat and we find that there's a stowaway. So we certainly have a right to remove the stowaway from the boat, right? But the fact that it's a person there, we have certain obligations as to how we can remove them. We can't throw them overboard right at the spot, but what we can do is we can pull into the nearest port and then kick them off. Okay, and that's within our rights because we own the boat, right? And so that's where I'm saying that there's that the bodily autonomy just means we certainly have a right to kick the person off the boat.
So you would say, though, let me ask you this, because it has to do with this. So let's say that we were able to find in some way, there's through philosophy or science, that personhood or that being begins at conception at that point.
Okay. All right.
Just for thought experiment. And,
so for the sake of argument,
let's say
we're
I'm
agreeing.
right. Then I'm right.
Right.
Cut.
Okay.
We're done. No. So just for the sake of argument. So let's say we have that. So you at that point would be opposed to abortion because I think it would be analogous to the stowaway on the boat, unless you're able to remove it in a way that it could still survive and live. So in that instance, like it's the stowaway, it's not necessarily about autonomy, but in that case, it's about personhood. Is that correct? Or no?
Well, see, the personhood would affect the man. That would affect our responsibility as to how we could have this thing removed, or how we could have the person removed from the boat, or how we can have this person removed from the mother's body. And so again, for sake of argument, we're assuming that a fertilized egg is a person. Okay. And so then we need to consider a couple of things. First of all, can it survive outside of the mother? If we, you said before.
Well, no, kind of what I'm suggesting though, regardless, because you put viability as having personhood. I don't.
Right.
I just say that that it is that I'm giving him these rights at conception. It has personhood now. So
yeah, I'm assuming that for the sake of this answer here.
Right.
So if we're assuming that, then you mentioned before you were okay with fertilized eggs that didn't implant, right? You just we called that just part of the natural cycle of, the natural, unfortunate, but it's
right.
life. But
right.
it's ironically we say it's part of life, right?
Right.
And so so the mother would have the right to remove it from her body. And then and we would be, and if it was a person, we would be responsible to give a reasonable amount of life-saving effort.
Okay. So, right. In that case, it's about, like for instance, with the stowaway, it's not because you own the boat, you can do whatever you want on it. At some point it's like, hey, yeah, I own the boat, but I can't throw this guy off. I know he doesn't swim or in the middle of the ocean. I'm going to kill him. I can't do it that way.
Right.
And so that would interfere with bodily autonomy, but it's doing so because we're talking about another person. So,
well, it wouldn't interfere with bodily autonomy. What I mean, it would affect the manner in which we'd have to remove it. We could remove it carefully, and then if it survived, then great. And if it didn't, then that's just natural death.
And so basically analogous of we would take the stowaway back to land and kick him off. And then at that point, hey, whatever happens. So I'm not responsible for you.
Right.
Well, let me ask you a question kind of. The idea that the reason that we believe that life begins at conception is because we believe that human existence begins at conception, like it now begins to exist. And having that quality along with having it, having its own form, meaning that it has its own potentiality. It's not I keep wanting to say it's not a part of the whole because you disagree with me on that. But do you not think that was a better answer than some of the other times we've talked about? That the idea that at conception, that's the first time that you could really abort anything, and that those other instances beforehand are really, I don't mean to say arbitrary, but it really don't matter in terms of the subject we're talking about, in terms of abortion. And, we believe existence begins at conception. And so therefore, and the reason we believe that is obviously
we being you.
Yes, my camp, pro-life camp. I'm not talking you.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Right.
I know you don't believe that. But what I'm saying as a pro-lifer, we believe that existence begins at conception because obviously the only thing difference between, between us as fully developed humans and the children in the womb, or the life in the womb. When you look at why we consider conception as the starting point is because there's only 4 things separate us, you and me, from the unborn, as far as as far as our potentiality or our beingness as humans, and that's our size, our level of development, our environment, and degree of dependency. And so those four things, I don't think any of those would qualify as saying, well, if you're lacking in one of these areas, then you're either not human, or you don't have, or you're not a person, or you don't have, or you have less personhood rights than somebody else, just because I'm smaller than someone. So those are the only real four things that separate us from them. And so when you look at from the moment of conception, if those are the only four things separating us from them, I don't see any of these for being good reasons to imply personhood towards, particularly when you could apply any of these to adults, like they could lose some degree of dependence, or they'd be severely dependent on other people, so the environment, I think you would have a case in terms of the bodily autonomy, but that, that doesn't say anything towards the personhood. That's a totally different issue.
Well, that's why I said we're, at a stage of development where one would normally be viable, where one would normally be able to live separately. I differentiated that from an abnormal individual. And so if there's an abnormality, if there's an illness, there's an injury of some sort, that makes one dependent on others, that's a different situation. That's an injured individual.
Right.
Okay. So because they're at a stage of development where they would normally be independent, but they're not. And so,
right.
So it's a damaged, that's how we define as a damaged individual.
So I guess what I'm trying to find from you is I know that we stopped talking about this because we were kind of going in circles. I don't necessarily want to repeat it, and I don't care if this is in or out of the podcast. It doesn't matter to me. I just wanted to come back to this because I'm sincerely am trying to answer your question the best I can. That would be satisfactory. That we'd say, oh yeah, I see that. I disagree, but I see that. Right. So that isn't because you think it's kind of arbitrary. Our picking of conception, even though it's a major point in the process, you're like, hey, that's still just one point in the process.
I agree. It's a major step in the process. It's a major stage of development, and it's required. And there's also many other major stages of development. For example, if you remove a woman's ovaries, then there can be no babies coming from that anymore.
Yeah, I've never disagreed that there has to be other things that happen first.
Right. But you're saying that that's the first stage we could do an abortion. And what I'm saying is that we can stop this development process at any of these number of stages. You can remove the ovaries, you can tie the tubes, you can, chemically treat it so it won't implant.
Right, but the difference is this: you and I aren't having a podcast about why are we legalizing people tying their tubes, right? We're having a podcast
because we agree on that. We're having a podcast talking about the points that we disagree on. Right, there are some points that we agree on.
But what I'm saying though is that conception, that point in the process, the reason that we say that, hey, this is where existence begins. The reason, now you may disagree with me, but the reason why we say that is at this point is because there's a third person involved now. Or I don't want to say person, a third living, you know what I mean? A third living human, or a third human involved now that isn't, that has potentiality, right? So that
you're assuming your conclusion there. You're by calling it a third human.
No. Well,
you're saying it's a person because it's a human.
No. Personhood and human are two different things.
A human. I would say a person and a human are the same thing.
Okay, so let's distinguish between the two, because I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to conflate those two. Okay. So what I'm saying is, it is human.
It's human, right? And it was human before conception. right?
What
It
was
wasn't canine, right?
Again,
before
right,
conception, it was human.
But again, like I said, and maybe this is where the distinction is.
It was different.
I think you're confusing the parts with the whole, because the egg is a part, the sperm is a part, but because now the egg is fertilized and that there is this third set of DNA that left to this normal process that we call pregnancy, that this will develop and develop into a human being. So that's why, okay, well, let's just say, given all the perfect circumstances and a perfect pregnancy and a perfect birth and a perfect 18 years of living. Okay. What I'm saying is the reason we pick conception is because we believe that at that moment now, it is separate from the mother or father. And
that's what you believe.
So it is the mother? Is this zygote the mother? It's in the mother. It's a part of the mother, Scott. It can't be the mother. It is a separate DNA. It's a zygote. And I need to take some Advil. My head hurts. So you're trying to tell me that a fertilized egg is not separate from the mother?
I don't see any reason why you would think that.
I just gave you some to think that.
No,
it has DNA. It has DNA that's not the mother's and not the father's. And unlike other DNA,
we've talked
of
about
other
lots
body
of
parts,
situations where that's the case. We've talked about lots of situations where there was different DNA.
But that DNA won't ever develop as a human being. It will develop as cancer, or it'll develop as something else.
It could become a human being.
The cancer cells could become a human being?
No, the fertilized egg could become a human being.
Yeah, if left to the whatever normal processes that it normally goes through, it will develop as a human, right? So it'll go from being a zygote to being the other thing to being a fetus, right? And so that's why I'm saying
so it's not a human at the time.
Mother. That no, what
it's
do you mean?
Part of the mother's body. A fertilized egg. It's part of the mother's body. It's being nourished by the mother's systems.
Well, it's just because it's dependent upon the mother doesn't mean it is the mother.
Right, and and that doesn't give you a reason to think it's not part of the mother.
Well, when someone goes in and has an abortion, okay, does the mother end up dead?
No, just like when they have a manicure, the mother doesn't end up dead.
Right, and again, I said you are confusing the parts with the whole because, and this is why I'm saying this, because it will become a fully developed human being. Skin cells will never do that.
As will an unfertilized egg. An unfertilized egg with ideal circumstances will eventually become a human being.
An unfertilized egg?
Yeah.
No, hold on, I'm confused. You said an unfertilized egg.
Right. Jamie, were an unfertilized egg at one point. Correct. And you became every human being that's ever been born.
I wasn't.
At some point was an unfertilized egg.
I didn't exist until that was my mother's DNA, strictly. That was solely her DNA. I didn't exist in my mother's egg.
But we know
that was my mother's DNA.
That separate DNA is not the distinction here.
Well, it says you.
Well, but you agree.
You're assuming that. You're assuming that.
We can have two people that have identical DNA and be separate individuals. Yes or no?
Oh, say that one more time.
We can have two people that have identical DNA and be separate people. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. We can have one person that has thousands of different genomes within their body and still be one person.
Yes.
Okay. So then clearly DNA is not tied to personhood. Oh, it's a step in the process. It's a step in the process. Yeah, I'll agree with that. It's a step in the process. It's a critical step in the process, as they all are.
But if the sperm never fertilizes the egg,
okay,
I would have never been.
Correct.
Okay, so
yes, so all of the steps have to happen.
Right. Yes, they do. I've never disagreed with you.
And if the egg never left the ovary, you never would be.
You're right. You're right. But what I'm saying is the reason why I say that spot, that why conception seems to be a better marker, is because at that point now I am not egg DNA, strictly mother's DNA, and I am not sperm, strictly father's DNA.
Correct.
I'm a third set of DNA that has potentiality to be a human being.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's why I say that all I'm looking for is for you to say, yeah, I could see why you would think that does seem less arbitrary.
I haven't heard any reasons. Okay, you've said over and over again, this is happening. This is different than this DNA is different than this other DNA.
Are those not reasons?
And you haven't said, therefore, it must be a person because of blank.
Okay, therefore, it must be a person.
So how do we define a person? How are you defining a person?
How am I defining a person or a human?
I'm using those two terms interchangeably.
All right. So we've already talked about this, that there's a difference between a human and a person, in that something could be human and not a person, right?
So that,
we've talked about that.
I wouldn't, there's a difference between something being human, adjective, and being a human, a noun. Okay. So my ear is human, but it's not a human.
Okay.
Right?
So, and I would say
an unfertilized egg is human, but not a human.
Correct. Okay. I completely agree. And the reason we say conception is because from that point on, we have why am I having a brain fart here? Potentiality. This is now.
But we don't gain potentiality there. Their potentiality was always there. There's potentiality in an unfertilized egg too. Yes?
We're never going to come to agreement on this. I don't
answer that question then.
What's that?
Is there potentiality in an unfertilized egg?
There is no potentiality for just an unfertilized egg to become a human being.
So no fertilized egg can become a human being?
No unfertilized egg can become a human being. It has zero potentiality. All it will ever be, left on its own, like without the sperm, all an egg will ever be is just the egg.
No, that's part of the special circumstances around that. I'm saying that's part of the normal process.
I don't think I understand. So like the egg has no other potentiality other than to be DNA of the mother.
So you're saying
an egg.
An unfertilized egg cannot become a human.
Well, right, without sperm.
No, I'm not having any caveats here. I'm saying just that a bare question.
That's ridiculous. Of course, no, that's ridiculous. Of course
it's not. It's a legitimate question.
Of course it will become, it has potentiality to become a human.
All right, then we agree.
But the first point in that process is conception.
But you just said an unfertilized egg also has potentiality. So that's not the first point in the process. Because it doesn't gain potentiality. Sure, it gets closer. It's closer to becoming a human. But it's not, that's not the first point where it has potentiality.
Okay. All right. We're just going to have to agree to disagree.
If the fertilized egg implants, then it's even closer to becoming a human. And if the cells start to divide, then it's even closer.
All right.
And if the organs start to develop, it's even closer, and so on and so on.
I think that I gave a good case by saying, and I know you're going to keep saying, DNA doesn't mean it's an individual. What I'm saying
and you agreed.
What's that?
You agreed.
I agreed that it has potential to not be.
No, you agreed that you agreed that we can have two individuals that have the same DNA, and we can have one individual that has multiple different DNAs.
Right.
So
yeah, I did agree to that.
So
but that doesn't mean that I agree. But
DNA does not equate to individuality. DNA does not equate to personhood.
But I didn't say anything about personhood. See again, and maybe we need to define terms, or maybe we just.
So do you
need to
think
stop, 'cause I'm
identical
getting
twins?
mad.
Do you think
'Cause I'm
identical
getting
twins are two people or one person?
They're
Identical
2 people.
twins. Okay. So again, one genome, 2 people.
Right. So does it make a difference if what I'm saying though is you deny that the DNA from a fertilized egg, you deny that it's not unique in that of a human DNA unique, and that it's the earliest step in the process of at conception where an abortion can occur.
Well, technically, an abortion can only occur if there's a pregnancy, and a pregnancy begins on implantation. That's a medical term.
Okay, so all right, so let me say it this way.
Okay.
I think the fuss about all of this is that we believe existence begins at conception. You believe existence begins at, or you believe personhood begins at viability. I believe
Correct.
existence begins at conception. Okay?
Existence of what?
My existence. Right. Okay. Existence of a human that is a living organism, and it's human. And
Right.
it's
That
and
you-
it
you-
and it
right,
is
you've
and
said-
it is in itself. It is in and of itself a human that will grow into a human being.
Let me give you an example of the kind of thing I'm asking you as far as reasoning. Okay? Viability is the first time that the fetus can exist without assistance on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Without assistance on its own. It's not using the mother's systems anymore. It's using its own systems. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes it an individual at that point. Individual meaning separate. Individual meaning
Okay,
separate.
so you're talking about environment. So you're talking about location now. So location.
No, I'm not talking about location. I'm talking.
So if you're connected in any way to any other individual, then you're not an individual.
If you're not at a stage where you normally would be independent, then no, then you're not. Then if you're using somebody else's systems, you're not an individual. You're part of them.
So what about Siamese twins?
So that would be an abnormality. That would be an abnormality. Right?
So is that one person or is that 2?
That's an abnormal.
It
2
doesn't
people.
matter. It doesn't matter. Is it you're talking about
They're beyond the point.
Okay, yeah, right. So they're viable.
They're beyond the point where they would normally be viable separately.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's totally consistent.
And so, yeah, but you said so your reasoning, see, now my mind's starting to get fried because we're already a minute or an hour and a half into this thing.
I didn't get to finish my example of reasoning though. Okay, I didn't get to finish. Okay, so we associate individual rights with individuality.
And you're defining.
That's why it's not arbitrary.
So you're defining though individuality as something outside of the womb that is completely unattached to anyone else.
No, I'm not saying that it's unattached to anyone else. I'm saying that it doesn't have to be attached to something else. If a fetus is viable and they have to remove it, then it's fine.
I'm just wondering how dependency now, being dependent upon one thing or another.
It's not a dependent. It can't be dependent because it's not one thing and another thing. It's one thing.
Okay, but you're assuming that it's one thing until it's dependent on its own. That's what you're That's what you're assuming. That's the assumption there.
Well, it is.
You haven't made that. You haven't made that case just because. Well, take for instance a baby who's 8 months in the womb.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it's still attached. It's still using the mother. It's still gaining nutrients from the mother. It's still dependent upon the mother.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yet you would still say that since it could be removed and sustain on its own, then it's viable. So you're saying then that we attach value then, if it could sustain itself, we're going to give it value.
I didn't say value. I said we.
Okay, we'll give it personhood or whatever you want to call it.
So if it's an individual, then it gets individual rights.
And you define individual as something that could sustain itself on its own.
Well, of course.
Okay, so it doesn't matter where it's at. It
That
could
would
be in the
normally-
mother's womb,
that would
or it
normally-
could be on the moon. It doesn't matter. As long as it would be able to sustain itself, you consider that an individual.
As long as it's at a stage where it normally would be able to sustain itself.
Okay, so, all right. So your reasoning for saying viability is that it is at that point at a position where it could sustain itself. And that's your reason.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is your reason for choosing viability, and then personhood
Mm-hmm.
is based upon that.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't believe that human beings, so to speak, come into existence until they are viable, so to speak, right? Or until they can, they would normally be able to be viable on their own.
Right. Yeah. They transition from something that's becoming a
So-
human being, kind of like a pile of wood is not a house. There's going to become a point during the building process where you say, okay, now it's a house. You can have the plans all ready to go. You can have all the lumber stacked up. You can have the workers ready to go. You can have, the concrete poured. But there's going to be a point where you say, okay, now it's a house. It has walls and it has a roof and a door. It's a house. Up until that point, it's becoming a house. Okay, so it's building. You can't. Yeah, sorry.
So
go
what
ahead.
I'm asking is so that person does not exist until it can be an individual or it can be able to sustain itself.
There's not a person that exists prior to viability. No.
Okay. I disagree. And the reason why I disagree is because I think that regardless of stage of development, that it is still human, and it's distinct from the mother and father, and it is a whole in it of itself. Those are my reasons.
That was your
disagree with
conclusion.
them.
That's your
You might
conclusion.
know. Those are my
That's your-
reasons.
You just restated the same.
I'm failing to see.
You just said the
why
same
your
thing over
reasons-
3 times in a row, just using
Why
different words.
Why
You said
are
exactly
your-
the same thing.
What do you mean? I said exactly the same thing. Like
You said
what do
it's
you mean?
distinct, it's an individual, it's a person. That's all means the same thing. You just said the
Okay,
exact
so-
same thing 3 different ways and said that was reasons.
Okay. And so what's the problem with that? Is that not? Do you
No, you just
disagree
can't.
that that's not reasons?
You just can't restate your conclusion using different words.
You do. You say, oh, viability. You said viability is what is what you use. And when I asked you, to go into detail, you said viability is being able to be on your own.
Uh-huh.
And so I say that separate
I
genetic
said more
DNA,
than that. I said more than that.
Okay, but I guess I'm failing to understand. And listen, we're probably going to have to call this a day, because I just don't understand, Scott, why I'm unable to explain this idea. Like I'm also failing to understand how it's okay for you to say, I'm giving you reasons why I think personhood should be established at a certain point. And then I say, well, I'm giving you reasons why I think personhood should be established at a certain point.
Mhm.
And you're saying mine don't count.
And I'm explaining why.
So explain to me one more time.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I want to understand why my reasons can't count as reasons.
Because you're just repeating your conclusion using different words. You're saying, at this point, it's distinct, it's different, it's, it's
but I'm
a
not
being.
saying it's a, I'm not right. So like you're endowing personhood with viability and I'm endowing personhood at conception. I don't understand the difference.
The difference
you have
is
your reasons for giving viability and I have my reasons for giving conception. What is wrong with the reason? I believe that since there is a distinct DNA that now, and it is human, and it has potentiality to be a human being, that now is an existence of a new being. I don't understand why you can't accept those as good reasons for that.
Okay, we talked about DNA, and that's not the reason, because we talked about situations where DNA was separate from personhood.
Right, and I'm arguing.
And
I'm arguing that the DNA.
I'm not done. We also talked about potentiality, and there's potentiality before conception. We also talked about development, could develop into a human being, and that's true along the whole state. So what you're saying, you're not giving me any reasons that differentiate that stage from other stages. Yeah, different things happen, but you're not telling me, you're not giving me what makes that stage special as opposed to other stages. What I'm saying is that prior to viability, we have these things are interwoven, inseparable. Okay, inseparable, one thing. After viability, separable, two things. It's kind of like if you take a snowball and cut it in half. Before you cut it in half, you have one snowball. After you cut it in half, you have two snowballs.
So why can't I say that about conception?
Because because there's no distinction at that point. The DNA changes as part of the process of developing into a person.
Scott, we're never going to agree on this.
What about this? Let me ask you one more thing, okay? I know it's late.
I'm so frustrated right now, dude. I'm so frustrated. You know what? I'm trying to be generous, right? I'm trying to be gracious in thinking that you're just not trying to tout the abortion line. Like I'm thinking to myself, how can he not see what I'm trying to say? My mind is blown. I'm just really at a loss that, and I just don't know what else to say. I don't know if I can make my position any more clear. I'm just repeating myself over and over again, and I have no idea. I'm trying to understand the difference between your position and mine. And maybe I have to think about it some more and try to figure out how, the difference, why your stage is different than my stage. So maybe I'm just going to have to think about that because I just
so why don't we do
it.
this? Why don't we commit to having a recap, have a rewind, watch the replay or whatever. But let me ask you this, okay? If cloning, where they insert the DNA into the egg and then it grows, they've done it with sheep and stuff, and they might have done it with human beings. I don't know. Is a cloned human being not a person? Because the DNA would be identical to the mother's.
No, it is it would be identical to the mother's.
If they took the mother's DNA and injected it into the egg and cloned the mother, would that be a person? Because the DNA is identical.
I mean, yeah, it would be a person. Yeah.
And you don't see how that conflicts with what you've been arguing the whole time.
No, only because I think the DNA is I'm just trying to use that DNA to distinguish that there's a third party.
So it's necessary but not sufficient is what you're saying.
Explain to me what you mean by that. I mean, I think I know what I mean by that, but I want to know what you mean by that.
So it's an important part of the process. But it's an incomplete process.
As far as conception?
We can separate that step from the process. We can have an egg with identical DNA, and you're still calling it a person. Okay, so You don't see how that just undercuts the whole thing you've been saying?
No, because I think our argument in lies the parts from the whole. Because when I'm bringing in DNA, what I'm trying to establish is that there's a third party there.
And would that not be the case with the clone?
And you're saying it would be. That's all I'm trying to distinguish is there's a third party. The reason why I chose conception is because that's a third party. And it's human as far as it's of human origin, and it's a third party. I'm not trying to say that DNA makes it a person. I'm trying to say that when I'm trying to use DNA, I was trying to use it as a, like, I don't know, like a hard break. Like, okay, we had two individuals and now we have three. So I think our problem, I think where we're at odds now is I think that third set of DNA is a whole. It is a human, and you're saying no, it's not. It's a part of the mother. I think that's wherein lies the rub. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. I suggest we stop here. You can take the last word if you'd like. And let's just, I don't think we're going to improve if we keep going.
All right. I just, you know what? I think one more thing to think. So like, would you call dough a pizza?
Would I call dough a pizza?
A big lump of dough. Would you call a big lump of dough pizza?
No.
Would you call a piece of pepperoni a pizza?
Nope.
Yeah. When you put them together, you're like, hey, pizza.
They could become pizza, yeah.
That's what I'm saying is before that, you just have dough. You just have pepperoni. It's at this point in the process that now it can become, it's fertilized, and now it has potentiality as far as you can't go back. Like it's a done deal. So I don't know if that makes any sense. And I don't know if I probably just repeated myself for the 500th time.
Well, I offered you the last word, so we can end there. All right. We made it through that,
Scott,
and we're still friends. We're still friends. Go figure.
Well, speak for yourself.
Oh, well.
I'm just
now
teasing.
Who's getting a little jumpy, huh?
I'm just teasing.
All right. Well, okay. So anyway, that was kind of our take on the situation. And so now we're going to move on to Jamie has a little bit coming up in Oh, the Humanity.
Oh, the Humanity.
And now we're going to jump into a little bit we call Oh, the Humanity. And in this particular bit, we talk about some of the things that we as human beings do that often impede us from really finding out the truth. There are things that are just about our nature that we find ourselves falling into, different little traps, so to speak. Last time, Scott, if you remember, you did a little bit about cognitive dissonance, and it's something that we all do as human beings. And in this particular episode, I want to talk about something, again, that we all as human beings have a tendency to do, and that is called confirmation bias.
That sounds kind of devious.
Sometimes it is, but typically what you see in confirmation bias, a lot like some of the others, is we really don't know it's happening. It's almost a defense mechanism. So the definition of confirmation bias is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. Or sometimes it's the tendency to interpret or to look for new evidence that might confirm one's existing beliefs or theories. And so basically, we want to find evidence that backs up what we already believe.
So kind of like, nowadays you hear a lot about people talking about echo chambers. Would you say that it's related to something like that, where people just listen to others who have their same views? We'll only watch the news station that agrees with me, and I'll only subscribe to the blogs that agree with me. That kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
That could be a part of it. So that is kind of like the culture, right? So we tend to find ourselves as human beings to latch on to some of our real basic beliefs, and we defend those beliefs at all cost, because for most of us, a deviation in these beliefs, or dare I say that we change our mind, would in a lot of cases more than rock the boat. Sometimes it would sink it. And what I mean by that is this. Sometimes, let's just take someone in Islam. So someone who is a Muslim. Within their worldview, within their religion, apostasy or walking away from their religion is something that is seriously shunned. And so typically, if you're a Muslim, your family's Muslim, your workers and your coworkers are Muslim, the people you hang out with, your friends, they're all Muslim. And if you were to walk away from Islam and you were to convert to anything else, most of the time you would be shunned by your family, your friends. And that is a big deal. I mean, that would absolutely rock someone's world. In my particular case, of course, I'm a Christian pastor and I defend the Christian worldview. So if I were to come upon some kind of evidence, some kind of defeater for, heaven forbid, the Christian worldview, that would absolutely rock my world. I mean, I'm married to a Christian. My children are Christian. My whole immediate family are Christian. My employer is Christian. All of my friends primarily are Christian. And so by walking away,
your podcasting partner, not Christian.
Well, not Christian. So we would still
So you'd have a safe haven here. Everyone's welcome here. Everyone's welcome here.
We might actually have a better relationship at that point, wouldn't we? I mean, I don't know.
Well, it kind of undermine the whole idea of the podcast, though. So we'd have to change it to not or not. Well, that doesn't have quite a nice ring to it. Not as good.
It doesn't, but I might convert to something other than atheism.
Oh,
yeah, right. You're kind of thinking that maybe that was the default. Maybe I don't. Maybe I convert to something else. But regardless, there is this absolute huge life change that would happen if I found my beliefs to be not true, or if I was convinced it wasn't true. And so confirmation bias is a way that we, as human beings, protect our core beliefs. Because it's obviously a lot easier to live in comfort in what we believe. And a lot of times it's easier to live a comfortable lie than an uneasy or hard truth. Frank Turek, Christian apologist, has said before, and I think that he credits this quote to someone else. I'm not sure who that first cause was, but Frank Turek says...
I caught that. I caught that one there.
What did you catch?
You didn't know who was the first cause of this quote.
So, you like that, huh? So he is quoted as saying that most people are not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. They're looking for those things that satisfy them, both in a spiritual way, in a financial way, in an emotional way. And so a lot of times people become guarded about their beliefs, really apathetic about seeking after evidence for what they believe, or actually digging down to see if what they believe is true. They become very apathetic, and that's where we see this confirmation bias.
Okay, so it's like they have some kind of investment in their position.
Oh, yeah.
It seems to be related to what I was talking about last time, about cognitive dissonance, possibly even a reaction to that.
No, that's a really good point. And when you said that there's an investment, I almost think it's an understatement. And that might be because I'm a Christian and my entire life is centered around Christ. It's centered around what I believe metaphysically, and these things that are outside of the material. And so we see this a lot of times when people are afraid that this evidence that they're seeing or this evidence that they're looking for, the evidence they find, that if it isn't going to support their beliefs or worse, provide support for a different conclusion, then that's when you see this confirmation bias. They'll disregard evidence or things that would support some other conclusion or not support their conclusion, and they'll only look for evidence that will back up what they believe. We see this in a lot in politics and in, of course, religion. And so I would say that a couple of examples of this. First, there are some atheists who consider themselves philosophical naturalists, which I know, Scott, that you are not a philosophical naturalist. What a philosophical naturalist is it's somebody who, from the start, rules out anything supernatural. They say there isn't anything supernatural, and so let's go find the natural cause for whatever they're looking for. And I don't want to paint everybody with a broad brush. That wouldn't be fair. But I will say that I think that there are some naturalists, philosophical naturalists, who are not interested personally in some kind of spiritual or supernatural conclusion. And so they find themselves in this kind of confirmation bias where they're going to say, you know what, I'm not even going to accept evidence that would appear to be supernatural in nature, and I'm only going to accept evidence that's natural in nature. Now,
so it's kind of like a presuppositionalism, but on the atheist side.
Yes, that I would say actually that's a very good analogy, and that whole presuppositionalist that is a whole nother podcast, maybe two.
Right, yeah.
Okay, maybe two, because I probably would have just as much against that as you would. I'm not a big fan of that kind of idea, and just for our listeners. A presuppositionalist is somebody who just kind of presupposes something off the bat and then really doesn't accept any evidence to the contrary. And we see this a lot in different circles, and in a lot of times we see it in Christian circles. We have apologists like myself, except for I like to look for evidence and things like that, whereas a presuppositionalist, a lot of times they're going to presuppose the God of the Bible, and then they're going to argue from that perspective. And that is not what I like to do. But I think a philosophical naturalist kind of presupposes some things up front, and I think it might have something to do with this confirmation bias. Now, I think a little more clear-cut case would be I see a lot of people within my own camp, within my own Christian community, who are not willing to look at evidence, period. They're not willing to look at any evidence. They stay in this state of ignorance, kind of ignorance is bliss, because they're either too lazy to kind of dive in, or they're deathly afraid that somehow that their ship is going to be rocked and sunk. And so we see this within Christianity a lot, where we have people who say, you know what, I'm not even going to look at evidence. I'm going to rule it out. Like a lot of Christians rule out evolution right off the bat. And some of them will rule it out on on some theological grounds. And while I understand where they're coming from, I don't necessarily agree with them. I would rule out evolution from a science standpoint. That's a whole nother podcast. But they sometimes rule it out from a theological standpoint, while others rule out evolution out of a confirmation bias. Somehow they see evolution as some kind of defeater for Christianity, in that if evolution is true, then there is no God. And so they will not accept any evidence for evolution, even if I drug it in. If I found the bones of the missing link and drug it in and threw it down in front of them, that they're out. The same kind of people that if we found the bones of Jesus, they somehow that's not Jesus, I'm still a Christian. All information to the contrary, they're going to disregard because I think a lot of it has to do with fear. Like I said before, nobody wants to think that they're wrong, particularly in something so major and so life-consuming as one's
so
as
foundational
one's worldview.
to
Right.
So would you say it seems like it's kind of like some kind of intellectual stubbornness? They just kind of like cross their arms and huff in the air and say, no, I'm not listening to you, la, 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 la. I'm putting my fingers in my ears.
Yes, that is absolutely the case. And of course, there are all kinds of reasons behind this confirmation bias. But I think within my own camp, I can paint that broad brush and say that it's because of fear that somehow their worldview is going to be rocked. And so I know this has happened to me before. I've had to catch myself in certain political environments, certain information that comes across my desk. Like, for instance, I'll give you a for instance. I saw just recently an article, and I can't even remember who published it. I just read the headline that said genetics is now finding that everyone came from, a single couple, a single set of people, which would be beautiful. That lines right along with a literal interpretation of like the Genesis account in the Bible. And so my initial instinct was, yeah, great. There you go. Done.
Right.
Brush my hands off. All right, see, haha. Christians won, atheists none. And I stopped myself, and this was just a day or two ago. I stopped myself and said, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. I am not going to draw any conclusions based upon 6 or 7 word headline of an article that I have no idea where it's even from on Facebook. Like, I saw one of my friends had posted it too, and I private messaged him and said, hey, listen, don't jump to conclusions here. This would be awesome if this were true. But I have a sneaky suspicion that there's not something right here. Genetics is not that clean cut. There are minds much greater than mine that have been thinking about these kind of things and digging into genetics and genetic research for decades, and it's still a little dicey. So we really can't conclude anything based off of something. I don't know where this information came from. For all I know, some kid down in his basement decided to write a little blog, and then someone else picked up on it and and went with it. So, I said, you know what? I think we need to find some kind of, if this is more evidence for this or something, I want to see some peer-reviewed research. I'm just not going to take as much as it would be great, because this will, or this would help my worldview. And that was my initial reaction. My initial reaction wasn't one of like, oh no, I need to be neutral, and I need to, I need to lay out all the evidence, and I need to think clearly and not presuppose things and not be biased. That was not my first reaction. My first reaction was, yes, look, haha, that's it, game over. And I was happy that I caught myself like a nanosecond after I thought that and said, that's absolutely dumb. What are you thinking? And you know, you need to dig a little deeper and find out where this is coming from. So I think that it's inherent, this cognitive dissonance that you talked about last week and the confirmation bias that I'm talking about now, that these kind of things are inherent and that we have built as psychological defenses for ourselves. And we need to learn that a difficult truth in the long run is going to be much better than a comfortable lie. Or what I think is even worse, ignorance and apathy. I think that ignorance and apathy are the two absolute worst things within Christendom right now. There's just a lot of Christians who just really don't care. And it's hard for them. It's hard for me to get them even interested in seeing evidence or argumentation. They just don't care. And, you know, they'll put up these different things to try to defend what they believe. And we all do this, you know, the humanity. We are but humans. So I think my advice to our listeners is when we see information, we have to know that our initial instinct, probably no matter how hard we try, is going to be to either accept the information because it supports what we believe or reject the information because it doesn't.
Right.
And I think we need to stop and say, you know what, if we're that certain that what we believe is true, then we need to allow our beliefs to be tested. And to be in the fire, and to be looked over and worked over and discussed. And we need to have opposing views in there. And we really need our worldview to be battle tested. I don't want a worldview that is, you know, we're in our own little conclave and, you know, we don't stick our head out for anything or anybody. At least I want my worldview to be tested and to either fail because of the evidence or be supported based on the evidence, but not just because it's what I want.
Right. Definitely. I think that's. I think you hit the nail right on the head there. I think that's an awesome story that you told there, and it's thinking is hard. Thinking is hard, and it's easy to back away from it. So that's great that you were able to catch yourself and do that, and to kind of force yourself to you made a conscious decision. This is the way I want to be. This is the way I want to think about things, and this is the way I want to approach things. And stuck to your guns, and I think that's awesome.
Remember the commercials back in the 80s when they had the frying pan and the guy held up the egg. And he said, and then there was the other commercial where the dad storms into the son's room and he's got all kinds of drug paraphernalia. And he's like, son, where did you learn how to do this? Where'd you get this? Who taught you how to do this? And the kid sits up and hollers back, I learned it by watching you, Dad.
Right.
I think almost based upon what you had, the example that you had given in the last episode about the cognitive dissonance and the story that you gave about how you went through that and how you personally saw yourself going that way and you wanted to learn from it and prevent it and things like that. I think that was also one of the reasons why I was able to catch myself in this particular instance, because I remembered that. And so, hey, so there's a little something there for you, a little treat, a little goodie in your corner.
I'll send you a bill then for my services.
Well, listen, we just bought a house. I ain't got much money left, so can we do monthly installments?
We'll figure something out. We'll work out the details.
Great.
I'll put my people on it.
Sounds good. Well, listen, everybody, I'm glad we were able to talk a little bit about, in this segment, Oh, the Humanity, about how we are human and how we have certain things that we put up to kind of defend what we believe, but they're not really honest defenses, and that we need to be cautious of those things and careful and proceed as truthfully and as honestly as we can.
I agree. Well said. And that about wraps it up for episode number 3. Please send us your ideas, questions, and comments to email at godornotpodcast.com. If you'd like to know more about the topics covered in this episode, I would recommend a book called On Being Certain. And this is related, not directly related, but it's very closely related to the confirmation bias, the topic that Jamie talked about in the Oh, the Humanity. And basically it's about the idea of certainty and how certainty, how that is, what is it? What is certainty within our psyche, within our psychology, and how does certainty affect your perceptions? How does it affect your thinking process and that kind of thing? And it was a very fascinating book. It was a very easy read for me. And it was by a man by the name of Robert A. Burton, MD, and it's called On Being Certain, Believing You Are Right Even When You're Not. So, Jamie, what do you think? What's your recommended book?
My recommendation is going to be Why Pro-Life: Caring for the Unborn and Their Mothers by Randy Alcorn. It was a very quick read. And I guess it took a lot of the emotion out of a rather emotional kind of topic, and a lot of kind of getting to the what's in the roots of this. What are the roots of this issue, and not only just for people who are considering an abortion, why they should choose life, but also to people who have had an abortion, caring, because as a Christian, we believe too that there are many victims in the case of abortion, including the woman who has had one, a lot of times has some issues. And so we want to be all encompassing and helpful there. So Why Pro-Life by Randy Alcorn.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. And thank all of you for joining us. And we hope you'll be back with us next time when Jamie and I will be continuing our discussion on morality. And we'll have a little bit of behind the scenes coverage for this topic. Until then, this is your dialectic duo reminding you to talk to each other.
See you later.
This has been the God or Not podcast. Send your questions or comments to email at godornotpodcast.com. If you'd like to support the show or grab some God or Not gear, please visit the website at www.godornotpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.